Hello everyone, my name is Paul Sigler. I'm doing a video recording for the presentation of my final project. I think my program's pretty cool. I hope you guys do too. Basically what it does is I have a database that stores the numbers that got picked for the Powerball for the last 20 years. And my program will take what day of the year it is today and get all the numbers that got picked for this day in the year for the last 20 years and then average those. So the syntax for this does get a bit complicated. I was going to start with my flowchart just because it's a little bit easier to understand. And so my program starts at the top up here. I do have a bunch of variables that I declare in here before I get started. Probably the easiest way I can think of to sort of describe my program is break it into two parts. The first part would be the right section right here, and then the second part would be this whole glob over here on the left. And what the part on the right does over here right away is it will create an array of date-time objects for what days would be equivalent for the past 20 years in relation to what day it is today. So I get all the dates of interest right away, store them away in an array. Once we got that part, then we actually access our database up here, and we store that in just sort of a database object. I'll get more into this as we go on. But then the left side continues on down here to go through all the records in the database and then try to find those dates of interest. And when it finds one, it'll add it, and it'll just keep looping through the entire database, and then it'll average them at the end and output them. So now that you guys kind of understand sort of how my program goes about doing what it does, I'd like to give you guys a brief overview of what I actually got running here. I got Microsoft SQL Server 2008. In order to view stuff with this, I got Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, and I've been using Microsoft Visual Studio 2010 Service Pack 1 since we started this class, which I have up right here with my program in it. So it might be easiest to start out with how I got my database set up, so let's take a look at that quick. Alright, so I got my lottery database here. If we expand this out, we can, it's just a really simple database with one table in it. I didn't do anything too extreme. So I got this one table, numbers, and the numbers table has 7 columns. The date that the numbers were picked, each individual numbers, and then the Powerball number. The important thing to note here is that the date column actually is a date-time object, and the other 6, the numbers and then the Powerball, are all integer 32s, which is just a basic integer. Taking a look at how we can actually sort of run a query here to just show you guys that I actually got data in here. Let's just select the top 100 rows here. And it shows us our results. We have the date time column, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and the Powerball. So that's the data within the table. Now that we got a good idea how that is set up, pretty simple, let's take a look at the actual program. So now that you guys sort of have an overview of how the database is set up, pretty easy stuff, let's take a look at the actual program here. So inside Visual Studio, what I did for my final project is I created a Windows Form application, and when you do that, it lets you make a nice little window that you can use for output or input for your program. But it does also generate a lot of code. Most everything inside these Form 1 files was generated by Visual Studio, and it's just for the sort of the display of the program. It's not like a console application or anything. It actually pops up a window, so I thought that part was kind of nice. But everything inside the most everything inside the lottery numbers.cpp is actually the meat and potatoes of my program. So looking at the lottery numbers.cpp, I have all my class definitions at top. Some of the ones that I thought were pretty cool were the system data SQL client one. This one I had to use to establish my connection to my database. The system collections one I had to use to create my date time object array. And you guys are probably familiar with the other ones listed up here. Looking at my variables here, I will go through these because there are a lot of them, and it's easier to understand if you know what they are. So these top two ones are pretty much loop variables. Int end, this is sort of like a switch, could have been a boolean, I just left it as an integer. Int number of years, this one's really interesting. Say if I added 5 more years of data in my database, I could go in here and change this 20 to a 25, and then my program would use that extra 5 years. It's kind of nice. It defines how some loops are set up and how the average is calculated. These next int adv nums, these are the variables that I use to build up the averages. The first one would be like the first number that was picked, second number, third number, fourth number, fifth number, and then the sixth one is actually the Powerball number. These other ones, and these converts is what I use to convert integers to strings. There's some temp strings in here that I use for that conversion also. I set up this current date variable here to today, so this one's really important. And I have the rolling date, which is kind of like the temp date one, but it's used to both of these are used to calculate the what day was exactly a year ago, what day was exactly 2 years ago. That's what these two are used for. And I have a couple vectors down here as well. Moving on, the next thing I have here is the declaration of my datetime array. It's an array of datetime, and it is the size of int num of years, which is 20. So basically it's a one-dimensional array of datetime objects. And this next section I have here, if you remember back to the flowchart, this would be the right leg of the program. I'll highlight it here so it's easier to see. Oop. This part right here, this is the part that will generate the dates of interest. So what day of the year would it have been 5 years ago? What day of the year would it have been 10 years ago? And it's important to note that this might not always be the same exact number of date because of leap years and whatnot. So that's why I had to go ahead and do this instead of just subtracting the year. Let's just go through this really quick. So first of all, I have a for loop here which goes from 0 to 19. What will happen is that I will set this rolling date variable here equal to the current date, which was set to day up above, and I will subtract 1 plus I from this. So if it was 0, I would be subtracting 1 year. And I have to do this because how I use I throughout the loop. So I'm subtracting however many years it is as the loop progresses from this into the rolling date variable. And here's where I use my switch, int end equals 0. That's just so when it finds the date, it won't go through this anymore. and then we check to see if the day of the week is a Wednesday or a Saturday. So this is important also because the Powerball is only ever drawn on a Wednesday or a Saturday. So if the day of the week today is a Thursday, then what I would need to do is loop through all these days and then keep adding a day to each day until I get a Wednesday or Thursday, and then set INTN equal to 1, essentially breaking the loop. So the dates of interest are Wednesdays and Saturdays. If today is a Thursday, then exactly a year ago from now, I would want to figure out when the next Wednesday or Saturday is, and this part calculates that. Storing it in the rolling date, the temp date, is what's used to determine the Wednesday or Saturday, and then the rolling date is eventually, after all this breaks, is what gets added into the master date array. So I know that was quick, but that's sort of how the right side of the program works. Now, the next good part of it is how the left side of the program would work, and a lot of this is just getting your head around the syntax. Basically what I need to do, or what I did here, was created a SQL connection object, con, and then I had to generate a connection string. So every time you connect to a database, the database will be accepting a string with things such as the computer name, what database you're connecting to, what kind of security you got, usernames, passwords. I didn't use half of what you can throw into these things. So there's the connection string for your database, which gets saved into your connection object. And then based on your connection object, you can create a SQL command. So if you've taken a database before, or database class before, if you've worked with databases, you might be familiar with these. Select statements, store procedures. It's pretty much anything you could do in SQL you could do in here. I'm just grabbing everything from the table. So I'm sure there was probably a way to do this program with writing one fancy SQL command, but I didn't even bother with that. I just got a really simple one that took all the data from the table and then dumped it into it dumps it into it down here. But so I set the SQL command here, and then I set it relative to the connection right here, and then I open that connection. Once that connection is open, this part is sort of like the meat and potatoes here for the SQL connection. I have the SQL reader object, and I set it equal to the result of the executed command. So this reader object variable here is what sort of represents in my program the entire database. So now that the fancy SQL stuff is out of the way, this is kind of less abstract. So what I have here next is this while loop, while reader can read. So basically what this will do is it will loop through every row in my database. And the reader, when it's referenced from within this loop, will equal the value of the one row. So when it loops through this, it'll loop through it for one row, then it'll loop through it for the next row, and it'll just go through it sequentially. So syntax for this is kind of nice, but that's what's going on there. So every time I get a new row from the database, I want to check it against my dates of interest. So I'll loop through all of the years first. So I go through year 0 through 20. It'll actually go only to 19 because it's less than 20. So when that happens, then what this next if statement here is kind of long, but basically what it checks for is the date matches. So actually be the day of the month. So if it's like the 10th day of the month, if that matches, and the month number matches, and the year number matches, then I've found a row in the database that is one of my dates of interest. So what I'll do there is I will add that into the average number variable, and then this will keep getting added up until it goes through the entire database, which will be so it should have 20 different numbers added up into this variable here as it goes through. So that's what this loop does, and then after the loop ends, I divide this variable by the number of years, getting the average. The rest of the CPP is pretty simple. I take these average numbers and I run them through this stuff to convert them into strings, which I need to do to display them. That's what all this is right here. And then after that, I close the connection to the SQL database. Well, I stop reading it, and then I close it. And then I call the form1 to actually generate the form. And I kind of modified this to so that the form1 definition will accept these average numbers as strings. So that's how I passed them between lottery numbers.cpp and the form1. So after this form call, the call to generate the form is actually ran, pretty much everything that I did in my program is complete. It jumps over here to the form1, though I can run through this quick. The constructor for form1 accepts a string A, B, C, D, E, F, and I set that equal to a string that's locally, or these are global, I believe. Those global? Yeah, I'm pretty positive those are global. And then I call the initialize components gets called. This is generated by the compiler. So if we look down here under initialize components, right here, this is where the actual properties of all the objects on your Windows form are set. And these get set to the variables that I passed from lotterynumbers.cpp. So let's try to find one of these here. Label 1. These are just all the labels. Yeah, so here we have strnum1. So that was one of the variables passed in up here. strnum1 equals A, which was passed from lotterynumbers.cpp. So that's actually getting set to the text of a label at runtime. And so is num2, num3, num4, num5, and the Powerball. So that's how I set that with using two different files on the form itself. So that's kind of how my program works in a nutshell. Let's see it run here actually. So if I hit the debug window in Visual Studio, yes, I want to build it. And we can see it pop up here. And these numbers down here are the numbers that got passed from the lotterynumbers.cpp, which are the average number of the specific number that got picked for the current day that it is over the last 20 years. So if you guys see this video and it is before they pick the lottery numbers on Wednesday, because today is Tuesday, you might have some numbers to pick. Hope you guys enjoyed my little video here, and hope you got something out of it. Thanks, guys.